The Minoans on Crete, back in the Bronze Age, had their own writing system. This was the first civilization in Europe. Scholars call it Linear A. It was a syllabary, which means each symbol stood for a whole syllable, although they did have some vowel signs as well. Syllables like ba or da. In this case, we're going to talk about the ni. Now, ni shows up in the Old Testament in a spectacular way, and I consider what follows to be one of many lines of proof that Jesus Christ is exactly who he says he is, the Son of God and God himself. In the beginning, this video was going to be about two symbols, the ni and the Aleph. Now, the Aleph continues on in the Hebrew, although it becomes alpha in Greek. Now, the alpha comes from the Minoan symbol for E, which is one of the vowels that I was talking about, but not the Aleph. But I found so much on alpha and Aleph, I knew that I'm going to have to split these off into two companion videos. So the one that's been uploaded along with this one is Aleph is for Asherah. So please watch them both. I'm very proud of them, especially if you're a Christian. These are important theologically. So what is ni? This. He's an athlete with his arms held up in victory. He glitters. This symbol for ni is also the symbol Minoans used for figs. And this is where our amazing story begins. At that time, Abimelech, accompanied by Phicol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, "God is with you in everything you do. So now swear to me by God at this place that you will not deal falsely with me or with my progeny and posterity, but will act as loyally toward me in the land in which you reside as I have acted toward you." Abraham replied, "I so swear." Abraham, however, reproached Abimelech about a well that Abimelech's servants had seized by force. "I have no idea who did that," Abimelech replied. "In fact, you never told me about it, nor did I ever hear of it until now." Notice how Abimelech doesn't take any crap out of Abraham. You made a deal with this old boy, and you and your descendants are going to stick to it. These are the Philistines. That name is an anachronism in Genesis because they wouldn't be called that for several centuries. They put that here because at the time nobody knew who the captor were, which is what they always called themselves. They never called themselves Minoans. This is the Middle Minoan, which we know from archaeology was a peak period for their presence in the area that Abraham was living. The entire northern hemisphere, Europe, the Middle East, India, China, all the way to North America, was recovering from some kind of ecological collapse, a big one, clearly, that we still have not gotten to the bottom of. People all over the Middle East were migrating. So even Abraham's migration to the Promised Land fits perfectly in with the archaeology. Perhaps the Minoans are making the place a desirable destination, although from what I'm about to show you, the more obvious conclusion is God brought them together on purpose. The Cretans had recovered early from this catastrophe, and they were filling in a power vacuum here in this part of the world, which later on the Egyptians would be able to fill in quite nicely. Thank you very much. After Abraham made his covenant with them, he continued to live on under their protection, him and his children and his grandchildren and even some of his great-grandchildren. This covenant, just like Abraham's covenant with Yahweh, was for eternity. In fact, centuries later under King David, the Israelites would renew that covenant. I talk about that in the video, Aleph is for Asherah, the companion. And almost 2,000 years after Abraham, this covenant would come to bite them in the ass, because they broke it. I believe Abraham made an impression of the Minoans, and I think he and his family members show up in Minoan iconography. At the very least, we're looking at a culture that heavily influenced him and his descendants. If you read the text indicated while looking at these images, you'll find an almost precise word-for-word correspondence here. And here. And here. I talk about this exact image in Aleph is for Asherah. I think this is a Minoan dancing queen, and she's provoking epiphanic visions. You can see the stage beneath her feet. In previous videos, I thought these might be sacred plays, and there's no doubt they had those, because we found at least one of their theater areas at Knossos, one of their major cities. But we also found the platform for their dancers and accompanying musicians at Knossos. That platform is actually celebrated in Homer's Iliad. Nevertheless, what we're seeing looks an awful lot like Genesis. I've been reading the Bible for decades. I've read it cover to cover at least 4 times. I've read some parts of it at least a dozen times, especially the Gospels. So when I talk a lot about the Bible, I'm not a newcomer here. I'm very comfortable with it, and I'd like to think that that shows in these videos. We're told there's heavy Middle Eastern influence on it, and that is true, and it is to be that's what's expected. But there's a lot more than that. Now, the patriarchs in Genesis had a very odd way of talking to their deity, and some have suggested that schizophrenia might have run in Abraham's family. But it's only when I started studying the Minoans that I found anything else like it. One big surprise is the almost complete absence from Mycenaean seals of representations of a static divine epiphany, which we just saw. There is persuasive linguistic and textual evidence that the Mycenaean Greeks were influenced by Minoan notions of divine apparition in constructing their beliefs of what gods are and how they manifest themselves to human beings. They, and the later Greeks, used a word for deity, theos, constructed from a different Indo-European root than in other Indo-European cultures. Especially when used in compound words, the root, thes, conveys the peculiar sense of the eerily instantaneous presence of a supernatural force. Yet, unlike the Minoans, the Mycenaeans did not attempt to portray this aspect of divinity pictorially. And guess what? This precise aspect of Minoan religious culture shows up in the Bible. You see, this is not the first time Abraham meets Abimelech. From there, Abraham journeyed on to the region of the Negev, where he settled between Kadesh and Shur. While he resided in Gerar as an alien, Abraham said of his wife Sarah, "She is my sister," which is true, they're half-brother and sister. So Abimelech, king of Gerar, sinned and took Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream one night and said to him, "You are about to die because of the woman you have taken, for she has a husband." Abimelech, who had not approached her, said, "O Lord, why would you kill an innocent man? Was he not the one who told me, 'She is my sister'? She herself also stated, 'He is my brother.' I acted with pure heart and with clean hands." God answered him in the dream, "Yes, I know you did it with a pure heart. In fact, it was I who kept you from sinning against me. That is why I did not let you touch her. So now return the man's wife, so that he may intercede for you, since he is a prophet, that you may live. If you do not return her, you can be sure that you and all who are yours will die." Early the next morning, Abimelech called all his servants and informed them of everything that had happened, and the men were filled with fear. Then Abimelech summoned Abraham and said to him, "What have you done to us? What wrong did I do to you that you would have brought such great guilt on me and my kingdom? You have treated me in an intolerable way. What did you have in mind?" Abimelech asked him, "that you would do such a thing?" Abraham answered, "I thought there would be no fear of God in this place, and so they would kill me on account of my wife." So Abraham is shocked to discover that the Philistines revered Elohim. Abraham had done the same thing to Pharaoh earlier. Now, many scholars think this is a doublet. It means it's the same story, coming from two different sources, and the Bible included them both. For example, one of them might have come from the northern kingdom of Israel, the other came from the southern kingdom of Judah. But I don't think so. I think this is compare and contrast. God did not warn Pharaoh, but he did warn Abimelech. In earlier videos, I thought the Minoans were monotheists, because this tells us they worshiped the same God Abraham did. In fact, Abraham was shocked to discover that. In fact, it bit him in the ass. They were just as shocked. And now you can see why Abimelech bit Abraham's head off. As a person, he didn't trust him. He was very good at telling stories. He had the air of a con artist. That's okay. We all have our thing. Were it not for Jesus' sacrifice, we would all go to hell. Abraham was saved by faith alone, as are we. Please note, Abimelech bit Abraham's head off, and God didn't say anything about it. Also note, Abraham and his family lived under Abimelech's protection. This is no less a person than Father Abraham himself. Nevertheless, Abimelech is clearly the senior partner in this relationship. We're getting set up very nicely for the events of 2,000 years later. Now, as I discussed in Aleph is for Asherah, Abraham was a polytheist. Thus the Minoans were too. Thus I was wrong about Minoan monotheism. The Israelites thought Yahweh was just the storm god. We thought Yahweh was the sun god. Now, as I've discussed several times in my videos, I follow the tradition laid down in the Rig Veda. The sun god, the storm god, and the fire god are all the same god. Who he is depends on where we see him, or where he talks to us from. Okay? Now, centuries later, and by the way, I had a dream that God sent, I'm certain, because it's a fulfillment of a promise that he made to me decades ago. Had a dream that told us the same thing. Now, centuries later, Constantine the Great thought he had won the Battle of Melian Bridge under the protection of Sol Invictus, the invincible sun. Later, he realized it was Jesus that had talked to him, and Jesus who had saved him. This is not pagan. God was talking to us too. He flat out says that in the Bible. We were dragging behind the Israelites as far as Revelation was concerned, obviously. But the way he talked to Constantine the Great was no different than the way he talked to King David. Now, as I said, the symbol for knee was used to represent figs in Minoan documents. But I don't think it represents the actual word. I think it represents what figs do for you. Now, the fig is embedded in a very interesting cultural complex in the Aegean. I'm certain the Minoans spoke an early form of Latin. So, their commander in Genesis, Phicol, is commander of the fig.
Ficus. Fici is fig. Phicol was probably the genitive or possessive, probably something like ficuna.
I figured that out a long time ago, so when I started looking deeper into Minoan iconography, I was always on the lookout for figs.
Minoan Religion by Nano Marinatos. And this is the only time figs have shown up in my research. And look what we have here, warriors, martial contests. What do you think? It looks Greek, doesn't it? Like from the classical age? But this is more than 1,000 years before. The Minoans were a hell of a lot more influential than you realize. I wouldn't be surprised if the first Olympic Games were actually on Crete. A scene of contest may be depicted on another fragmentary stone vase, which probably came from a conical stone rhyton. Rhyton were originally painted seashells. The long, tapered painted seashells, they started making them out of stone after a while. Two figures, one on his knees as though climbing, the other in what seems to be a running position, are preserved. What is important here is the religious setting, which is clearly indicated by an altar topped with sacred horns and a fig tree. Finally, let us repeat that most boxing scenes here discuss decorated stone rhyta, so that the association of games with ceremonies can be deduced also because of the medium of the representations. Just like the Greek Olympics. And the rhyta that have been preserved, some of them are gorgeous. These might be the trophies won by those athletes. So, how did this show up in later Greek culture? Figs were held in such high esteem by the Greeks that they created laws forbidding the export of the best quality figs. Figs were also revered in ancient Rome, where they were thought of as a sacred fruit. According to Roman myth, the wolf that nurtured the twin founders of Rome, Romulus and Remus, rested under a fig tree. Excellent. Mithridates, the Greek king of Pontus, had declared the fruit as a cure for all ailments. Oh, a cure for all ailments, there you go. And made it mandatory for all his citizens to eat it daily. To give the fruits their place of honor, they were presented to the winners at the Greek Olympics, too. The ancient Greeks and Romans attached a lot of importance to the fruit, as amply proven by the commonly held idea that figs were a storehouse of nutrition and could be used to cure almost all ailments known to them. So much so that they were the favorite fruit of Cleopatra, and the aspen that bit her was brought into her in a basket of this fruit, which she really relished. Ancient Olympians earned figs for their athletic prowess. So there's the fig again. So those figs sitting on that altar were probably waiting for the winner, as was the rhyton itself. And Pliny the Elder extolled the fruit's restorative powers.
I just glanced at the different symbols Minoans had used for products in earlier research, so I probably saw this symbol for fig, but it just didn't register.
But this paper brought it home. The Mycenaean Linear B Rosetta Stone to Minoan Linear A Tablet HD 31 Vessels and Pottery. That's Hyatriata. The Linear A, we don't know how to translate, it's Minoan. But the later Linear B is built on the same writing system and it's Greek. It's actually the second time people who spoke Greek used the Linear A system. They did the same thing to the east on Cyprus, on the island of Cyprus, and they'd used that writing system for 1,000 years, all the way up to the time of Alexander the Great. I talk about the Cypriots a lot in Aleph is for Asherah, the companion video, especially about our alphabet. I think they invented it. What is the actual word for figs in Minoan Linear A? The odd thing about this supercillogram ni is that it was taken over lock, stock, and barrel by the Mycenaeans. We will probably never know why, but it is clear that they thought it expedient to hang on to it. Well, I think we do know why, don't we? Based on the sound system, he thought the Minoan word for fig was something like nirai or nitai. But he never thought to read Genesis.
So I turned to my trusty online Latin dictionary, and I found two words that this ni could have stood for. And by the way, I do the exact same thing in Aleph is for Asherah, except that time I do it for a title of a Philistine king. Once again, it's not the word for fig, it's what a fig does for you. Just like Aleph is for Asherah, the word Seren does not describe what the king is, it describes what a good king does. Actions apparently spoke louder than words with the Minoans.
We could be looking at Niteo or Nitor. to be sleek, in good condition, to bloom or to thrive, to shine, glitter, look bright. Advance, depend on, press, lean upon, strive, labor, struggle. Both are promising, but now we need to make sure both words were around at the same time, or some form of them. Niteo. Look at etymology at the center and you see Proto-Indo-European ne, to shine. Ne, ni, vowel sounds travel all the time. That's more than close enough. I love these verb sentences. I am radiant, I shine, I glitter, I sparkle, I am sleek, I thrive, wow. Now we go to nitor. Kneg, to bend, to droop, cognate with Nico. I bear or rest upon, I lean on, I press forward, advance, that's good. I strive, struggle, exert myself, again. I try to prove, I contend in argument, I argue. A decent fit. The etymology doesn't fit as well, and the definition doesn't really shine as well as I am radiant, I shine, I am brilliant and beautiful, I glitter. And that's what those little crosses are. Me, glittering. This isn't the only symbol where Minoans convey something like that. This key, which I think became the Greek key, the sound one metal thing makes when it taps on another. Key, key, key. Precedence. Beautiful. Now, let's take it to Jesus, who goes out of his way to point right back to our ficol. When he was going back to the city in the morning, he was hungry. Seeing a fig tree by the road, he went over to it, but found nothing on it except leaves. And he said to it, "May no fruit ever come from you again." And immediately the fig tree withered. Not good. Jerusalem isn't bearing fruit. Learn a lesson from the fig tree. When its branch becomes tender and sprouts leaves, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see all these things, know that he is near at the gates. Amen, I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. A troublesome passage for us Christians because it implies Jesus should have been back long ago. I'll take the hit. But you will notice the figs have come back.
So Abraham made a covenant with the Philistines, the captor, whose descendants become the Romans. Abraham's descendants betray Jesus to the Romans. They slander him and libel him. Less than 40 years later, Romans burn Jerusalem to the ground. Now, if we look at the Roman end, we see that they are consciously fulfilling the prophecy, but they are unconsciously executing the terms of the treaty that their ancestors made and confirmed with Abraham and his descendants.
Titus reportedly refused to accept a wreath of victory, saying that the victory did not come through his own efforts, but that he had merely served as an instrument of God's wrath. Even the pagan Romans knew they were executing God's will. Caesar's Messiah by Joseph Atwill. He's quoting from Josephus. Now, the stones that were cast were of a weight of a talent, and were carried 2 furlongs and farther. A talent is about 60-70 pounds, 27 to 32 kilograms, depending on whether this is a Greek or Roman talent. A furlong, our version of a Roman stadi, about 625 feet, 190 meters. The blow they gave was no way to be sustained, not only by those who stood first in the way, but by those that were beyond them for a great space. As for the Jews, they at first watched the coming of the stone, for it was of a white color, and could therefore not only be perceived by the great noise it made, but could be seen also before it came by its brightness. I am radiant, I shine. Accordingly, the watchmen that sat upon the towers gave them notice when the engine was let go, and the stone came from it, and cried out aloud, in their own country's language, "The stone cometh." So those that were in its way stood off, and threw themselves down upon the ground, by which means, and by their thus guarding themselves, the stone fell down and did them no harm. Except, the stone cometh is not what the Greek says. It says, the sun cometh.
There are 4 languages at home here: Greek, Hebrew, Latin, and Aramaic. The vast majority of the people spoke Aramaic. Of those 4, there is only one in which the word for sun is virtually identical with the word for stone, and that's Hebrew, ben and eben. So why are they calling this out in Hebrew? I think they're mocking Jesus. Jewish Christians had evacuated Jerusalem ahead of the Roman armies because Jesus told them to. 2 important sayings of Jesus are wrapped into this one call, and 4 stories about Jesus.
Jesus said to them, "Did you ever read in the scriptures? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. By the Lord has this been done, and it is wonderful in our eyes. Therefore I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you, and given to a people that will produce its fruit. The one who falls on this stone will be dashed to pieces, and it will crush anyone on whom it falls." When the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parables, they knew that he was speaking about them, and although they were attempting to arrest him, they feared the crowds, for they regarded him as a prophet. "I am the stone, and I will crush you." He says it very publicly here. And in 70 AD, you're not crushing anybody today, Jesus. "And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming upon the clouds of heaven with power and great glory." They see the stone. There's Jesus, leading pagan armies against his own people. Too bad it's not doing him a lot of good. And while we're here, Matthew 17, 1 through 8, the Transfiguration. "I am radiant, I shine."
If only they'd paid attention to everything Jesus said.
"Therefore, stay awake, for you do not know on which day your Lord will come. Be sure of this, if the master of the house had known the hour of night when the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and not let his house be broken into. So too you also must be prepared, for at an hour you do not expect, the Son of Man will come." But the Romans contrived how to prevent that by blacking the stone, who could then aim at them with success when the stone had not been discerned beforehand, as it had been till then, and so they destroyed many of them at one blow.
He moved from riding high on a cloud to a thief in the night. All of you people who like making your smart-ass comments about Jesus, you better watch out. You're riding high because he's setting you up. He's given you exactly what you want. I read Caesar's Messiah a little more than 10 years ago, and came to the conclusion that Josephus had without a doubt read the Gospel of Mark, and he was making fun of it. Now I think he was making fun of his fellow Jews through the lens of that Gospel. For example, he recast the scene of the naked young man in the Gospel of Mark that occurs when Jesus is arrested. Atwill's theory is Christianity was invented by the Romans to trick the Jews into worshiping the emperor. I don't think he quite got it right, but he was close. Josephus thought that Trajan was the Messiah. But Josephus was actually not the emperor. His father Vespasian was, and this nicely parallels Jesus and his Father in heaven. What I suspect happened here is Josephus thought Jesus was actually the Messiah, but he thought Trajan was the second coming. And he was right in a way. Trajan and his father Vespasian represent what theologians call a type. I'm going to talk about that later. I know a lot more now than I did then, so I'm going to have to reread that book. In fact, I'm going to have to actually read Josephus, apparently in Greek. The story that's unfolded here is a resounding victory for gays, Christians, and gay Christians. Both this video and the companion video, Aleph is for Asherah, are, as I've said, spin-offs of my earlier video, Good Twin, Bad Twin, Part 1. And I believe this entire narrative of the fig doesn't just prove that Jesus properly condemned Jerusalem as the Son of God. It is also a resounding proof that Jesus is actually talking about gay couples in the Gospel of Luke, as I insist in Good Twin, Bad Twin. Let's read the passage.
It's not the whole passage because I'm just dealing with the so-called Q source. This is a collection of sayings of Jesus that Matthew and Luke both pulled from. "And he said unto the disciples, The days will come when ye shall desire to see one of the days of the Son of Man, and ye shall not see it. And they shall say to you, See here, or see there. Go not after them, nor follow them. For as the lightning that lighteth out of one part under heaven shineth unto another part under heaven, so shall also the Son of Man be in his day. And as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it also be in the days of the Son of Man. They did eat, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all. Likewise also as it was in the days of Lot. They did eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they builded. But the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven to destroy them all. Even thus shall it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. I tell you, in that night there shall be 2 men in one bed. The one shall be taken, and the other shall be left. 2 women shall be grinding in the same place, because that's what the Greek says. The one shall be taken, and the other left. And they answered and said unto him, Where, Lord? And he said unto them, Wheresoever the body is, thither will the eagles be gathered together. And as I've pointed out several times, several videos, we have lightning, we have eagles, we have missing bodies, Zeus and Ganymede. a beautiful young man abducted by Zeus. He was made into a mortal god and brought into Olympus as Zeus's cupbearer and lover. This is the actual passage. This slide shows how I know that the fact-bashers know that these are gay couples. They've been screwing around with the text for centuries. Now that they can't get away with that anymore, they've started screwing around with their translations, which you can't see here. You can pause and read my notes if you want. Here's the King James. I tell you, in that night there shall be 2 men in one bed. The one shall be taken, and the other shall be left. 2 women shall be grinding together. The one shall be taken, and the other left. 2 men shall be in the field. The one shall be taken, and the other left. That does not belong there. And they answered and said unto him, Where, Lord? And he said unto them, Wheresoever the body is, thither will the eagles be gathered together. Now, the together here in the Greek, when we're talking about the women, tells us the women are in the same place the men are. So, where are they grinding? They are grinding in bed, and that meant the same thing to the Greeks and the Romans that it means to us. So we have gay people suddenly taken up in heaven in glory. Do we have something like that going on with the Romans? And is it connected with Jerusalem? Yes, to both, and famously so. First of all, the city was renamed Aelia Capitolina. Aelia is the family or tribal name of the Roman Emperor Hadrian, pictured here. He was a homosexual. This name stuck around until well into the Christian era, all the way until the Arab conquest. The Arabs still call Jerusalem Aelia. Capitolina refers to Jupiter Capitolina. Jupiter, of course, is the storm god. And who else is a storm god? Yahweh. I touched on that. I cover that in depth in the video Aleph is for Asherah. I also show that Jesus goes out of his way to act like a storm god. It's blatant once you see it. But it is also my position that the Romans are the heirs to the Minoans, and their Capitol Hill, and Jerusalem has now been dedicated to Jupiter of Capitol Hill, was originally Captor Hill, because that's what the Minoans call themselves who settled there, the Captor. Now, I touch on that here, and I also cover that in depth in the video Aleph is for Asherah. So, with 2 words, we bring in homosexuals and storm gods and the Minoans, with whom Abraham had made a covenant, the violation of which led directly to the leveling of Jerusalem and the renaming of Jerusalem. Perfect. But let's finish this with a bang, shall we? Because there's something else that happened that there's no way Jesus could have had anything to do with if he were just a man. And it happened after we know for a fact the Gospel of Luke was written. This prophecy was fulfilled as a type. Now, this is a specific theological term. I used it when talking about Trajan and his father, the emperor. It means someone in history temporarily stands in for the true fulfillment of the prophecy that will come in later. The Greek king Antiochus IV, most famously, stands in as the Antichrist in the book of Daniel. There is a famous Roman gay couple that it stands in as a perfect type for our gay couples in Luke. Hadrian had a lover, Antinous, who was from northwest Turkey, the exact same part of the Roman Empire that Ganymede was from. Antinous drowned in the Nile River under mysterious circumstances. 2 men together in one bed. One was taken and one was left. He was the love of Hadrian's life. In the wake of his grief, Hadrian made sure he was assumed into heaven and made into a god. Here he is as Osiris, and here as Dionysius. His face is all over the empire. You see what happens when you don't lie about the Bible? We couldn't see this because fact-bashers have been cock-blocking us for centuries. Yes, I know, my conclusion is shocking, but there's nothing that I've said or done in this video that is out of bounds either from a theological or from a literary or from an archaeological perspective. In other words, you cannot accuse me of working any of this illegitimately. I'm playing by the same rules everybody else is. And just like everybody else, we homosexuals have a right to defend ourselves from slander and libel, as do we Christians, whether we're talking about so-called gay rights leaders who say horrible things about us, but not anybody else, or atheists. If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe. If you know somebody who might like it, send them my way. Maybe they'll give me a thumbs up as well and subscribe. If you watch any YouTube video creator a lot, do the same thing for them. We appreciate the feedback. And this is a lot harder than it looks. Thank you and God bless.